We are live at the Goa School. So thank you so much for coming on board. You've had a long history working in development in UNICEF and in many, many countries around the world. And we'd be so interested to hear from you, Niloufar, about your journey, how you started, a little bit about your life story, and then all the things that you've come to believe, especially about investing in young people, which is the topic of today's talk. So here we go. Maybe we could start by you just telling us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and how you came to be in this line of development.
First of all, good morning from Toronto, 9 o'clock in the morning in Toronto. To you, Madhuri, and your colleagues, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure and honor always to speak to colleagues, and especially to speak to young people, of course. And one always learns from sharing experiences in these interactions. So thank you very much for your time. To share a bit about myself, I'm Iranian, now also Iranian-Canadian, but for most of my life, I was only Iranian. I was born in Tehran, the capital of Iran, in 1959. Much older than most of you and the young people who might listen to this recording. I left Iran when I was very young, around 4 years of age, because my father was an Iranian diplomat. And we lived with my parents, and I was a single child in Pakistan, in Austria, in Canada, Japan. Those are the countries where my father was posted and where I went to school. I got my high school diploma in Tokyo, actually.
Wow. So just for the benefit of everybody, the Iranian Revolution would have been, as you were saying, in 1979, where there was an overthrow of a dynasty, right?
Yes.
Where there was a lot of discontent with the Shah's rule. And I mean, I was a child then too, but this is what one has picked up. So just for background and to let everyone know what a scary time it was in Iran.
Yes. Well, I mean, most of us wanted change to happen and we supported the revolution, but we thought it would go into a much more democratic, open, and equal egalitarian society. But what happened was completely different. So that's why now when we look back, we look at it much more critically. But at that time, many of us, even those of us who came from families who in some ways you could say were better off during that period, but still we realized that it was not ideal and there was much more that could be done for the majority of the people. But in any case, to put that aside, because you asked me about my life story, so the revolution was another chapter in our lives. And we also lived through 7 years of war between Iran and Iraq. So my generation also experienced war and bombardments and running into shelters and power cuts. I was pregnant also part of that time. So being pregnant and having a newborn when there was a war going in your country, that was also another related chapter of my generation, you can say. And I had by then also begun working for the UN in Iran and had been married. I had children, 2 daughters, and then eventually came to the conclusion that for a better future for my children, it would be good if we left Iran. Once we went for me to continue my studies in London, UK, I got my master's and then PhD, returned to Iran, and then we left when I got a job with UNICEF Afghanistan in 1997, and then worked internationally until 2016, when I opted for early retirement because my mother had to begin dialysis and I wanted to be with her in Canada. And since then, I have been teaching at university in Canada, some consultancy internationally with UNICEF, giving talks and lectures, supporting civil society, mentoring young people, so forth. What I can do at this stage in my life.
Yeah, so but let's just dial back a bit because it's really interesting to me. So how did you land up in UNICEF? And tell me also, when you say you got your degree, was it after you were married and had babies? Because that would be really interesting and empowering for everyone to hear about.
Yes, definitely. It was, well, because I had an international background. I had lived abroad internationally and gone to international schools since my childhood. Joining the UN and doing international work was not such an affected issue. But if the revolution hadn't happened, probably it would have been a different life journey that I had. Because of the revolution, my circumstances changed. And one day, by coincidence, someone, and I went to the UN office to pick up some magazines, UN magazines for my mother. And the person sent to Iran, he was Indian actually, Krishna Day, to re-establish the UN presence in Iran. By chance, he met me. I was only 22, I think. And he wanted to hire a fresh breed of young Iranians to work in this new establishment post-revolution. So he asked if I was interested to be interviewed by him. And of course, I jumped on the opportunity because at that time, universities were closed for political reasons. So I couldn't continue with my studies. And that's how I joined the UN in Iran. And at that time, there was only one presence in Iran, not all the agencies. It was led by UNDP. And then later on, UNICEF, UNHCR, they all came on board. And in due course, I applied for the UNICEF position and joined UNICEF.
Wow. Okay. And then what was your first job about, and how did you develop your line of expertise?
Yes, I was an assistant because I was 22. So I hadn't done office work like that ever before. I can say I learned on the job. I had some very good, more experienced colleagues. Some of them are no more, but I am always grateful to them who taught me how to type in Farsi, the language in Iran, and English I knew how to type. I had learned in high school in Canada, but in Farsi, then, I would observe them. They would guide me. They would correct my mistakes. So I really learned office work on the job from my colleagues, you can say. And well, my parents had work, so I could always ask them and get their advice, support as well. So I began as an assistant and step by step, and it took time. It was not overnight at all. Gradually got promoted and was given other responsibilities. And I did translations for visitors we had, for consultants we had, for example. I helped write papers, correspond, make phone calls and appointments, all the things you do as a young assistant, you can say.
And then gradually your focus moved to children and women's rights and refugee rights.
Yes. The focus was always there, I think, but I didn't, have the opportunities. And I think my supervisors very quickly also recognized that I had a passion for social justice, women's rights, children's rights, human rights. So I think the first time perhaps was when we wanted to write a report or a situation analysis, as it is called in UNICEF. And, I was asked to support that. I knew other feminist activists who I was able to introduce to the UN management at that time in Iran. And so one thing led to another. And I think some of my managers realized that this was an area I could contribute to. Wow.
And then tell me about your time in Afghanistan, because you did talk about having landed in UNICEF Afghanistan. Now that would have been an even more war-torn situation than Iran, I imagine, in those days.
I had been to Afghanistan as a child with my parents. My parents had Afghan friends. So I always had a connection with Afghanistan, and it was close to my heart. So when I had the opportunity, actually at that time, emails, was it fax? I think, I don't know. I somehow reached the representative of UNICEF in Afghanistan, Mr. James Mohan. We're still in touch, and said that, I am determined to join the Afghanistan office. I'm willing to be a receptionist, anything, but I want to join your office.
And
So,
you could speak Bengali, obviously, right? I mean, it's so that was a big advantage.
yes, I spoke the language, exactly. He called me, and actually he spoke the language as well, and spoke in Farsi with me, interviewed me over the phone, you can say, and offered me my first international position with UNICEF, which was UNICEF Afghanistan. But it was based in Pakistan, because at that time we had sub-offices inside Afghanistan, but the main office where the representative and the heads of programs, etc., were based was at that time in Peshawar, Pakistan. So initially we went to Peshawar, and then our office moved to Islamabad. And only after the overthrow of Taliban the first time, 20 some years ago, it moved back to Afghanistan.
Yeah. Well, these are all really exciting stories because, I mean, how many people get to work in Afghanistan? How many women get to work in Afghanistan and, provide that sort of opportunity and access to the local Afghan people, which is, I mean, I've actually also had the good fortune of visiting it. It's a beautiful, beautiful country with beautiful people. But also very dangerous. And of course, now we know about the Taliban and how that restricts access, especially for women. And if there are fellows listening to this, then there's a lot of reading one can do about this in terms of, how people's rights are completely taken away from them because of a political regime. Now, we, of course, in India also have certain societies in which girls are restricted a lot, and we will be talking about that in a bit. But the question I'd probably like to ask you before we get into those things is, Niloufar, in all your years of development work, would it be fair to say that you believe most in investing in young people as sort of like the formula or this quote unquote silver bullet for development?
Thank you for your question. Well, I think the answer is multi-tiered. First of all, it is, I think, a duty. As duty bearers using the human rights language, we adults have the duty to support the next generation, whether it's our own children or other young people and children. So I think it's a matter of duty. It's also a matter of human rights, that children and young adults have the rights to be supported. They have the right to quality education, the right to quality health, the right to participation, to protection. And thirdly, it is also economically and socially the viable and only way forward. There's so many studies that show investing just a single year more in children has so much percentage gain in GDP, for example, or having a more educated mother by 1 year or 2 year reduces infant mortality by so many percentage. So it makes economic sense, it makes political sense, it makes human rights sense, and it makes sense in terms of sustainability and continuity of the universe and our human society in a more just, peaceful, respectful, dignified, rich, meaningful way.
Yeah, I mean that's beautifully put, actually, and I mean I don't know anybody who could have put it better. So if you're investing in young people, and if that's the mantra, then and if there are all these young people in the world who are looking to find their way in it, basically, what type of development do we envisage for them? Like there's this term that critical development that is on everyone's fingertips and sort of on their tongues. So it's like a buzzword. And I was just wondering if you could help us define that and tell us more about it and how does it relate to young people's lives?
Yes. Well, first of all, of course, not all young people are in the same boat. There's some very, very super privileged young people, and a majority, of course, who are not at all as privileged. So also you have to look at the expression of intersectionality for your young people to be, perhaps they're already familiar with it, but you can't, of course, categorize all young people. So you have to prioritize with young people who are most marginalized, more unjustly treated, face multiple deprivations. So first you have to do research and recognize which group of young people are at greater risk and require and deserve to be supported. And once you've done your research and you have the data and you know where and who those young people are, then of course, again, you need to do more research to understand what their priorities are. In one context, it can be health. In another, it can be education. In another, it can be security, or a complex mix of these. The situation of majority of young people in the Caribbean is quite different from India, for example, or maybe in South Sudan currently. So you need step by step to be evidence-based and based on facts and information and data and research and analysis. And then first have a commitment to serve the most marginalized, and then understand what it is you need to do, and then pull together the partnerships, working with governments, with donors, with NGOs, with the UN, with community leaders, with young people, youth leaders themselves, and basically together come up with the plans of actions, the policies, the advocacies that can promote the rights and well-being of the most marginalized of young people.
I see. So what you're saying is that you have to look very closely at the situation that they already are in, and then look at the alternatives that can be found for them, but with everyone who is there to support, whether it's government, etc.
Yes.
So it's a broad sort of almost like a multidisciplinary.
Definitely, it's a multi-sectoral, long-term, multi-partnerships, requires financial commitment by everyone concerned, governments, UN, NGOs, private sectors, communities. Then you need to have very good planning, and then have a buy-in, participatory planning. So you have a buy-in by the young people, by their parents, by their community. Then
but are there also sort of some critical sort of points in all young people's development in which they should get excellent intervention? And whether or not they come from super privileged backgrounds, I mean, obviously one imagines that they would get all of that in the right way. But like, for example, I mean, I work with Save the Children, right? So one of the things I took away is that if you don't give a child correct nutrition before 2 years of age, they are immediately, set back in terms of their cognitive development, their brain, their, and just the way that they might grow. They might be stunted or emaciated or whatever. I don't know. I'm sorry if I'm not using the right word, but the technical word. But so like that. My question is: are there sort of critical points in a young person's development that one has to sort of be on the lookout for?
Yes, I think you pointed out something that is very important, that even young people, it goes back, of course. First, you have to have, your mother must have had the right opportunity for safe pregnancy, safe delivery. Then the first 1,000 years of life are now proven to be very, very important. Then having had your early childhood development in kindergarten, nursery, etc., school years before you come to puberty or becoming a teenager and a adolescent and a young adult, and then into becoming an older young person. So all of these life cycle stages, each of them is very critical. But even if you have not been able to benefit from everything that is needed in an earlier stage, even more reason for those responsible to have programs for you to make up for it as you become a teenager or a young adult or a young person.
Yeah, fantastic. So, Niloufar, give us some real life stories about, young people's development. And you've been around so many countries, and not just where you grew up, but also you can tell us a little bit about where UNICEF took you after Afghanistan, and what are like the key things that you remember,
I always, to my students at University in Toronto, I always bring this example that one of my favorite projects ever was the project we had in Uttar Pradesh, which was called Garima, which was about menstrual hygiene management in 3 districts of Uttar Pradesh, reaching thousands of young girls living in villages through peer groups, community workers, NGOs, the government of Uttar Pradesh. We were able to convey to them what is happening to their bodies, why it's important they have negotiation skills so they can convince their parents not to marry them off early, to give them some privacy, help them with menstrual hygiene management, how they can advocate with their local elected officials. Basically, that has always been one of my favorite projects, because whenever we went to the villages to meet these girls, they were so inspiring. They had learned so much. Some of them succeeded in postponing the wedding marriage of their classmate because now they had the skills, and they went to the parents and explained to them, please let her finish her school, for example. Some of them succeeded in advocating with elected officials. These are our demands. If you build us a separate toilets and baths, if you do this, we will talk to our parents to vote for you. So there were such remarkable stories about everything that came out of this Garima project. It was a UNICEF Government of Uttar Pradesh project funded by IKEA Foundation. They also were very, very interested in this. And in fact, the daughter-in-law and the granddaughters of the original founder of IKEA came to visit our project. And they said they chose this project as the first project for the grandchildren of this family to visit, because, legacy is, of course, very important for such families.
Right. But, I'm playing a bit of the devil's advocate here, which is that Uttar Pradesh is probably one of the poorest states in the north of India. I think the population, they say if you pull Uttar Pradesh out of India, as a country, it would have as many people in it as Brazil. It is also still very, very poor. And I can remember a conversation with you, Niloufar, I don't know if you remember it, where you were talking about this one of the poorest areas called Shravasti, and you were telling me about how women there still have to be carried on like an upside down bed on their heads, like on roads that are not fully built to get to hospital. When they're in labor or whatever, and then die on the way. So if you go to some of these places, it's 200 years sort of behind us in the rest of India in time, I would say. And so, you're talking about the Garima project that went well, but there are still thousands of people who don't have basic rights in our country, right? And this is a huge number. And so one is poverty, and how much it is. I mean, I think official figures are somewhere around 30% or so There's probably more than that who live below the poverty line. And then you have on top of that this burgeoning population that we have in India, right? So we're now the most populous country in the world. We've overtaken China. I think it's 1.4 billion. And I'm also told that, again, I mean, I may not have my figures exactly right, but that the majority of them are young people. So somewhere around, say 25 to 30 years of age. So this now is the reason why we're having this talk, because for so many of us, either if we're already there or if we've passed that stage but are looking out to help young people, what do you make of all this? Because you've lived in so many countries. I mean, what does the outlook really look like to you for India?
Well, I think India has both great opportunities but great challenges, as do other countries, but India, because of its size and complexity, maybe even more so, and also because out of every 5 person in the world, 1 is Indian. What happens in India makes a big difference in the rest of the world as well. Yeah, definitely great potential from what I saw. Of course, there's been a lot of progress. Many more girls and boys are going to school and have access to digital platforms, for example, maternal mortality, etc. Not as much as it should, but it has improved. There are strong civil society organizations, though some of them are under great pressure now. There are amazing intellectuals and artists and community leaders, but again, some of them are under great pressure and not given the opportunity and space that they should be given. So those challenges are there, but though that this is on the opportunity side, and the rich history and innovation and entrepreneurship and diversity, richness of cultures and religions, I mean, that's all on the positive side of India. But we all know, and you know much better than I, that that cannot be fully tapped into unless the system is much more open, much more transparent, much more egalitarian. The institutions remain independent. There are checks and balances. There are evidence-based policies that are implemented rigorously and monitored and evaluated. And there is participation and transparency and accountability in society. So you're in a situation where you have great potential, but also you have great risk that this potential will not be fully fulfilled unless systemic changes happen.
Right. So can I be naughty and ask you, how would you explain these rather sort of complex ideas and concepts to young people who may not be familiar with this jargon, and what would you say to them? What can they use as their compass, going, as they're growing and developing in any developing country such as India?
I would say, of course, they should remain critical, but not cynical. So they should not accept anything without questioning it, but at the same time remain constructive, positive, and hopeful. So critical, but not cynical, I think is important, and I tell my students that. Second of all, I think seizing any opportunity for learning skills, traditional classical skills like literature and history is also very important, but also, of course, new skills, IT and data visualization, and every day there are new skills coming up. And third, I think remaining engaged, being part of communities, being part of youth organizations, NGOs, being curious and caring about not only what happens to themselves and their community, but also the larger community. I mean, I see when I speak to young people in Canada in my classes, they're always really wonderful young people. I think in Canada, they're very sensitive now, young people, about Indigenous rights. I think that is something that you can sense. They have now learn to care about, and really they bring it up all the time, which is great. On the other hand, I see that sometimes young people, because they are now so used to just 3 words on a Twitter or Instagram, they need to be reminded of still the importance of value of reading an article, reading a book,
and reflecting on that.
and thinking about it. Not everything comes in 3 words, Twitter or TikTok or Instagram. I mean, they have their role as well, but I wish for young people that they are able to combine the more modern and rapid ways of communicating with the more thoughtful, you can say long-term, deeper means of communicating, such as through articles, books, novels, nonfiction, fiction, you know. So a combination of all of this is important.
Exactly. So we are in the last minute of this talk, and I guess my last question to you would be: what is your vision for young children, and what would be, or young people rather, and what would be your message for them?
Regarding my vision for young people in the world, of course, I wish for all young people, regardless of their gender, regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of their community identity, religion, or a class or caste, where they are geographically in the world. Are they in a war-affected country? You know, are they in the prosperous part of the world? You know, what is called geographical destiny, kind of. It shouldn't be like that. Children and young people everywhere, regardless of who they are, should have access to quality health, quality education, protection, social protection, opportunities to develop their talents, to have their voices heard and respected, to participate in decisions affecting them, their lives. And then that creates not only a rich and enjoyable childhood and experience as a young person, but sets them up well for being responsible, productive young adults who will respect the human rights of others and contribute fully to their communities and to the society as large. And that then can help us live in a world where we can deal with climate change. We can bring peace and end meaningless and tragic consequences of conflicts, and a more egalitarian, a more socially just, more equal society, and a more democratic and open society in which everyone can flourish, really. That is what ideally, of course, I think most of us would aspire for. And we hope the young people that you work with also share that dream that we have, and that they who are the future in India, wherever they are, can take steps in that direction.
Wow, I mean, that is so beautifully said, Niloufar. It's been such a privilege to listen to you. And I think those kids that you teach at York University in Toronto are really lucky to have you.
Thank you.
Privileged. Absolutely. Thank you so much for talking to us about your life story, your experiences, why it's so important to invest in young people around the world. It's been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. My pleasure, Madhuri. Thank you for inviting me, and also your colleagues at the Goa School, and especially the young people with whom you are in touch. I wish them all the best in their life, and I hope they'll really, with zeal and determination and with support of individuals like yourself, be able to fulfill their aspirations.
And now you're part of the network, so I hope that you will meet them sometime in life. And then an opportunity for us to join forces and support them in their journey.
I'd love
to. Thank you so much, Niloufar.
Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day.
And you. Bye.